Hey y'all, welcome back to another doll movie review. Today we're going to be tackling Escape from Skull Shores from Monster High. And wow, it sure was a movie. That's about the best thing I can say about it. If you guys have been following along as I've been going through and watching the old Monster High media for the first time, you'll know that I've had mediocre to bad experiences. I really haven't had anything that was amazing and that I just dearly loved. Thus far, New Ghoul at School has been my least favorite movie to watch. I just thought that it was bland and boring and poorly done, and those are all very superficial issues that I do feel like carried over to some extent to Skull Shores. The problem is that I think this movie also had a lot more problems that were on a deeper level, so buckle up for this one, I guess. Before we can get into my thoughts on this movie, though, I have to give a couple of usual disclaimers. The first one, as always, is that this is just my opinion, so if you guys disagree, it's totally cool, it's nothing personal, we just have different thoughts. Then, as usual, I won't be using any video clips from the film, just because I am terrified of copyright, so I will have screenshots on screen for you guys to understand what I'm talking about. I'm sorry if that's a little bit more disappointing, but I cannot risk copyright. I'm afraid of it because I know the first time I do something, I'm gonna get hit. And then the other thing that I wanted to say about this movie in particular is that this film is the one in which Gil has the most screen time thus far in the chronology of me watching these movies. And I know Gil is a very contentious character within the Monster High fandom. A lot of people violently dislike him. A lot of people think that he's not so bad. I won't be talking about Gil in depth in this video. I feel like I had to say that because he was such a big part of this movie, so it'd be weird if I just glossed over him. But while I am starting to see where the kind of two polar sides of the Gil debate are coming from, I still don't have the full story, and I just feel like it's more prudent for me to wait until I've watched all of the Gen 1 media to then give you guys my thoughts on Gil, because otherwise I feel like I'd be giving my thoughts and then I might have to change it the next movie, and then I might have to change it back the next movie, and I would rather just wait to talk about Gil until I have all of the facts. So I am sorry if you were looking forward to that. I promise I'm going to speak about Gil at some point, but just not today. Lastly, if you guys do find yourself enjoying the video as we go through, if you could give it a like, that's super helpful to me. And if you're new here, welcome. Maybe subscribe if you like what you see and you'd like to see more similar sort of content. But yes, I think that is finally everything I need to say. So now we can get into why I thought that Escape from Skull Shores was not a good movie. So we're gonna start off easing into this, kind of talking about small and really unimportant issues on the grand scheme of things. I just feel like it's better to kind of dip our toes into the badness before we dive all the way in. So we're just going to talk about a few small, disconnected things that I didn't love about the movie. First of all is the fact that the, plot kind of gets started because Laguna and her friends are going to travel to the Great Barrier Reef to visit her family over spring break. You'll notice that I did say Great Barrier Reef, not Great Scarier Reef, and that is how it's referred to in this movie. Presumably the pun just hadn't been thought of at this point, and it genuinely doesn't matter whatsoever. Mostly I just thought that it was really funny that in this older piece of Monster High media, they actively refer to this place as the Great Barrier Reef, and then later on there's a whole movie called Great Scarier Reef. It's unimportant. This one I just thought was kind of funny. Now, those of you who have been along for the ride for a while will know that I'm a Gen 1 Frankie hater, okay? So, sorry, I just am not a fan. And I have a few things that I want to talk about regarding Frankie. The first of which is that she's animated so strangely in Skull Shores. It's not something where everyone else is animated the same way. It's not unique to this movie. Frankie stands out in the style of her animation, amongst all of the other characters. And it's also not something that I noticed in Why Do Ghouls Fall in Love, so it doesn't seem like she's animated this way intentionally for her character, or at the very least, if it is intentional, it's not consistent across all of the movies. But she's just animated in such an exaggerated fashion. And I don't mean the normal cartoon exaggeration. I mean, she is just making expressions and flailing about for every little thing. And it drove me nuts every time she was on screen. It was just so much, so over the top, very jarring. Probably it doesn't help that I'm biased against Frankie, but I really disliked it. Another thing about Frankie is that she's like very encouraging throughout the movie, and whenever it comes to Andy, she always says the right thing. She's always super, super nice, which might sound like a good thing, but I think the problem is that no other character exhibits this type of empathy, and it just strikes me as really, really weird. There is one other time where Laguna is like very sympathetic towards Kipling in literally exactly the same way that Frankie has already been sympathetic towards Kipling, but aside from that, every other character in this movie is just so much more standoffish and so uncaring and so uninvolved, honestly, that Frankie really, really stands out in this way. And I'm sure that it was meant to be viewed as a positive thing. I'm sure it was made to make me think that Frankie is just so nice, but it kind of had the opposite effect. Because there's no reason for the other characters to not be saying the same kind things that Frankie is, instead of making me feel like Frankie was just so kind, it made me feel like Frankie was the main character, so she gets to say all these lines, and then everyone else just ends up seeming kind of mean and rude because of that. And again, I understand I'm biased against Frankie, but it just felt weird that she felt like the only character who had a heart in this whole movie. I don't know, I didn't love it. Okay, this complaint is like only tangentially related to Frankie. It's not like really against her, so if you're a Frankie fan, I'm mostly done talking about her, at least for this section. So a huge plot point in this movie is that there was a like unnamed mysterious scientist that visited Skull Shores long before our ghouls ever get there, and she looked exactly like Frankie. This is a huge plot point, and it is never explained why that is the case. Now, I know that in real life people can just happen to look like each other. In fact, I have had numerous people who don't know each other tell me that they have seen someone who looks exactly like me wandering around my same city. So like, I know that it's something that can happen, but within a movie, for it to be such a big plot point, like so much of the movie hinges on these two characters looking alike, for it to just be like, oh, it's just a funny coincidence, it just seems a little bit lazy in the writing department to me. Again, I get that it can technically happen, but when you're hinging a huge plot on it, I just would have liked some sort of explanation as to why these two people literally look exactly alike. Okay, and then the last, like, relatively minor thing that I want to talk about here is Kipling. Literally from the first moment that he opened his mouth, I knew that he was going to go from bad guy sidekick to a good guy by the time the movie concluded. And I do think that that's a trope that can be done well, it can be interesting to see, but this movie did not do this in an interesting way, and instead of feeling excited when Kipling kind of got his redemption by the end, I honestly was just irritated because it was so predictable and so lackluster and frankly really, really boring to watch. So, now that we've kind of warmed up all of my complaining muscles, we can really start digging into the meat and get into the worst reasons why I think this movie was not great. Every single protagonist in this movie is sharing one brain cell, and 99% of the time Laguna is the only person who has it, and it was so frustrating to watch. Genuinely, every other character, like, didn't notice anything, didn't think about anything, and generally just acted more like a cardboard cutout of themselves rather than an actual person. There are so many examples of this, and it was infuriating to watch, so we're just going to kind of go in chronological order here. So, as our cast of characters is sailing to the Great Barrier Reef, they are attacked by a kraken. Keep in mind here, Laguna is an ocean sea monster. Like, she's from the ocean. Later on in the same film, we see Gil, who is a freshwater monster, be able to communicate with this kraken and befriend it and bring it to help the other characters out. So this is supposed to be like a redemption thing for Gil, but really what it does is it undermines the catalyst for the entire plot of this movie. Because if Gil, who is a freshwater monster, can communicate with a kraken and like become friends with it, there's absolutely no reason that Laguna couldn't have done this earlier in the movie and stopped their ship from being destroyed at all. And then even once their ship does get like wrecked and they're kind of marooned on this little island, why doesn't Laguna swim down and find some help? I understand that they are apparently pretty far off still from the Great Barrier Reef, so it's not like she could necessarily swim to her parents, like that might be kind of a long journey, but I just find it weird that the first course of action isn't to have Laguna swim down and either find someone who can help directly or someone who can pass along a message to her parents so that they can send some help. It just seems like the most logical choice, and I know that it's not the most plot convenient choice, But to me, it is the most logical choice, and so it's really irritating that it didn't happen, and that, again, the entire plot hinges on Laguna not thinking of this. Now, I know that I did say that Laguna was the only one using the collective brain cell of this group, so it might be kind of weird to you guys that my first two examples of people not thinking in this movie involve Laguna. I think that that really just goes to show how bad every other character is and how unintelligent their decisions are, because I promise you, Laguna still is the one who does most of the logical thinking in this movie. Case in point, once they do get picked up by Farnham on his boat, Laguna is the only one who's like even a little bit concerned. To be fair, the other characters do notice some things that are a bit odd, but as soon as Farnham explains them away, they're just like, oh, perfect, this man must be telling the truth. And like, I just can't understand that, because me, if I were picked up by two strange men on a boat, and then when I got on that boat, there were cages everywhere and like shackles and chains, I'd be freaking out. And then that feeling would only intensify when those same men do not take me to the destination I requested to be taken to, but instead make like a fun little pit stop. The fact that Laguna is the only one who's worried about this tells me that every other character had parents that failed them massively. Like, I do get that they were shipwrecked, it's kind of extenuating circumstances, but come on. Once they are on Skull Shores, the fun little pit stop I mentioned, a bunch of the ghouls are kind of walking around and they see a bunch of statues that are supposed to be replications of the scientist who looked exactly like Frankie. They don't realize that these statues look exactly like Frankie until Frankie stands right next to one of them, and I think it's so dumb. Like, if I saw a statue that looked exactly like my husband, he wouldn't have to be standing next to it for me to point out the resemblance. Like, if I saw a statue that looked like my husband, I'd be like, that's weird, I didn't know Tony had any statues made of him. You know, like, that's... I think it's so strange that you can be around someone almost every day, consider them one of your best friends, and then not recognize a statue that looks exactly like them. Then after spending the day on Skull Shores, Laguna's kind of like, okay, we need to get going, like my parents are going to be worried, I really need to get to the Great Barrier Reef. And Farnham's like, no guys, you have to stay, like the Tiki people, we're going to get to the Tiki people, are throwing you a little party! And everyone is so taken in by the idea of a party that they're fine with this, and they decide to stay the night on a strange island with strange men who pick them up on a boat and then didn't take them where they promised to take them. And I would be panicking at this point. I'd be like, all right, we need to ditch this guy, steal his boat, like something is wrong here, something is scary here. And they're just fine with it because it's a party, it's fine. No, it's so dumb. Laguna is the only one who's worried. And props to her for actually, like, having a thought in her head. And again, I understand that all of this has to happen for the plot to happen. But I've said this before in my reviews, I don't think that's a good enough reason. If you need your characters to be in a certain location, you need to come up with a convincing reason that they're there. And if you need for them to stay there despite all of the red flags saying you need to escape this situation as fast as possible, you have to come up with a better reason than like a quirky little party to keep them there. That's just not logical. And I don't think that the plot hinging on this happening is a good enough reason for it to happen. Plot convenience is not good writing to me. And we're still not done. So after everything does turn sour, like I predicted it would, not just because it was a movie, but because of all of these warning signs, Frankie is carried off by a giant purple monster. She ends up passing out from fear, like, as he jumps over a cliff, and she wakes up safe in a room with a normal-sized purple monster. Now, maybe I'm not being humble enough, maybe I'm like thinking I'm way more intelligent than I am, but I feel like I could have sussed out that these were the same person, right? Like, you're on an island that is mostly deserted, you have presumably met most, if not all, of the residents there, and you happen to encounter two purple monsters, and the only difference between them is their size, and one's like a little bit hairier. I don't know, maybe I'm just being unfair, maybe I'm picking on Frankie, but I feel like it doesn't take a lot of thought to put two and two together, especially in a world of monsters where so many people have unique abilities. I don't know, again, I could be being unfair, but I really do think that it's a more logical thing to think, oh yeah, this is probably the same guy that I was with before I passed out, just he has like a size changing ability, than it is to think, oh, I'm suddenly with someone else who looks suspiciously similar to the guy who carried me off. It's stupid. The purple monster in question is Andy, and there are definitely a lot of things about Andy that I could put into this section, but I actually have several problems with him. So he gets his own dedicated section, and we'll just suffice to say here that 90% of the time he's on screen, he's also an absolute idiot. We are nearing the end here, at least of this section. I'm sorry I'm getting heated. Like, I can't afford to be heated right now because there's so much to get through, but a couple more things to address. So, once the group of characters that we're following gets back to Monster High, Farnham decides to infiltrate Monster High, and his way of doing so is to put on a disguise, and this clever disguise in question is a fake beard and mustache that are bright red. And that's it. Now, I just think it's stupid that no one recognizes him. Like, it's not as though Claudine and Frankie and Dracula and the others met this man a while ago, or like they saw him in passing. They were kidnapped by him very recently, and most likely extremely traumatized by that experience and by him. So I just don't believe that this guy putting on a fake beard and mustache would be enough for them to not recognize him. Like, someone who has been through something that traumatic, especially so recently, if they saw someone with the same like facial structure, same body structure, same eyes, the eyes are the important part. Like, you look into someone's eyes and you don't see the eyes of the person who kidnapped you? That doesn't make sense. It's so dumb. It's so frustrating to me. I just can't believe that they were all so stupid as to believe that he was a different like person. I'm getting flustered. I can't talk. I'm irritated. Okay. Last entry for this section is a doozy just because it involves so many people. So I understand why Frankie and the others are afraid of Andy at first when they meet him on Skull Shores, because they do meet him when he's in his beast form. And as we've established, as I reviewed other pieces of Monster High media, in this universe, it seems like our monsters, like the core group, are afraid of monsters who have less sentience, which does bring up a weird ethical question of like, how sentient does a monster have to be before it goes from being your best friend to something that you're gonna run away from? Like, that's uncomfortable, but it's not what we're talking about here. If you accept that that is just the way that this weird little universe works, then it does make sense that Frankie and everyone else is afraid of Andy at first, because when he's in his beast form, he like doesn't seem to really be able to communicate super well. He's a little bit more out of control, so that makes sense. But they then see him as like his normal persona, and he can converse, he talks to them just like anyone else. And at that point, he kind of goes from this scary beast in their mind to, oh yeah, this is like just another monster, and he just can transform sometimes, you know? At that point, he goes from scary to being normal within their world. So I understand why they were afraid of him at first, but then he becomes just like a normal part of their life, right? Every other student at Monster High, once Andy is brought back to the school, is introduced to him as that normal person. They're introduced to him as someone who doesn't necessarily understand everything that's going on because he acts kind of weird in certain situations, and probably they've been told that he can like transform, even if they haven't, you know, that's not that weird, right? Like, he's just another classmate to them. But as soon as Farnham infiltrates Monster High and like emotionally manipulates Andy into transforming, all of them forget that 2 scenes ago they were in classes with this guy, and they freak out. All of the students are panicking and running and losing their minds as though this is suddenly a completely different character. The worst part is that Headmistress Bloodgood also acts this way, and it's just infuriating because you could maybe excuse teenagers not having the wherewithal to like understand that this is their classmate still and being frightened by the sudden change, but there's no reason that an adult in a position of authority should be cowering. Like, she should be talking to Andy and calming him down, saying, hey, it's all right, like, I know that you're feeling a lot of feelings right now, but it's okay, we know you're still you don't have to listen to Farnham. And instead she just doesn't do any of that, and she just cowers and she leaves Frankie to handle everything, because God forbid we forget that Frankie is the main character. Sorry, I'm not trying to yell. It's so frustrating, and I've talked about this in other movie reviews before, that the adults are just so irresponsible. I just think this is another really egregious example of that. Like, Headmistress Bloodgood should be doing better. So yeah, basically, I thought that no one in this movie managed to have a coherent thought except for Laguna, and maybe Abby. Abby did have a couple moments on screen where she was being logical, because every second that Abby is on screen, she's being logical, but she just wasn't enough of like a speaking presence in this movie to really turn the tide, and so everyone just seemed like an absolute idiot. Okay, listen, for like the first 30 seconds that Andy was on screen, I thought I might like him. I really tried to go into this with open arms, and it turns out that I shouldn't have. My issues with Andy can be broken down into like two basic categories. The first being that the way he's written doesn't make sense, and also, like I mentioned earlier, he just acts dumb. And then the second is that the way that Andy interacts with other characters and the way that we can kind of infer his age and maturity from that makes him a little bit creepy. So we're going to talk about the poor characterization of him first. Andy explicitly says to Frankie while they are on Skull Shores that his upbringing consisted of him going from Normietown to Normietown and presumably being the only monster there, and just experiencing a lot of fear and a lack of acceptance from the humans in these towns. So it makes sense why Andy is afraid of humans. It makes sense why he's afraid of people, because they haven't treated him well in the past. But he seems to think that monsters are going to be the exact same way, and it just doesn't make sense. Frankie tries to tell him that monsters, especially at Monster High, are accepting of each other and everyone's different, and that's wonderful. And she's also a walking embodiment of the fact that she's not perfect. Like, she literally can just fall apart at any moment. And Andy just doesn't believe her, which doesn't make sense to me. I'm not trying to discount his experiences. I'm sure that what he went through when he was younger was horrific and traumatizing, but that doesn't mean that it's logical for him to extend his fear of how humans will perceive him to monsters when he doesn't have any proof that that will be the same, and in fact has proof that it will be the opposite. I feel like it's akin to me saying, oh, I got badly bitten by a dog as a child, so now I'm afraid of dogs, but I'm also afraid of frogs. Because even though I've seen frogs and never been bitten by a frog, I'm 100% sure that if given a chance, a frog is going to mutilate me. You know, I'm not trying to say that he can't have any sort of trauma or can't be affected by what happened to him as a kid, but I am saying that the way that the movie presents it, as in humans and monsters are going to treat him exactly the same, it just doesn't really make sense to me. That kind of ties into this weird belief that Andy holds that he is somehow like the strangest monster to ever monster. It's almost like he's like a pick-me girl, but of the monster world. He's like, I'm not like the other monsters. Because, again, he's meeting other monsters, and this might be for the first time, and so I understand why when he's on Skull Shores he might think that he's super weird, but as soon as he gets to Monster High, he should realize that he's not that strange, right? Like, you have Draculaura, who is a vampire who is afraid of blood. I feel like that's weirder than shape-shifting when your emotions get too high, right? You have Heath Burns, who can literally get emotional and just set stuff on fire, which is very comparable to Andy's position. So he should see that and be like, oh, I guess it's not that weird that I have this experience. As I mentioned before, Frankie could literally just fall apart. He's surrounded by other monsters who all have different, situations than him. Like, none of them, as far as I know, has the same capabilities or same struggle. But it's not like they're super normal either, right? Like, they all have their own things that they deal with, and so Andy's insistence that the fact that he gets bigger when he gets mad is like the weirdest thing that could possibly happen. It's just stupid. While he's at Monster High, there is also this weird montage of Andy not understanding how things at the school work, and some of it does make sense, like the fact that he doesn't really get how cell phones work. There's not a definitive timeline of Andy's life or his age or anything like that, at least not from what I saw in the movie or what I could easily find online, but we do see a scene of him interacting with the mysterious scientist that visited Skull Shores, and it's from a black and white film. So I feel like it's safe to say that when Andy was part of civilization and he was growing up, he probably didn't know what a cell phone was. So that translating into the current day makes tons of sense. But again, we went over this. He grew up going from Normietown to Normietown. And there's a part of the montage where he doesn't understand how to use a fork or any utensils. He just eats with his hands, kind of like the Beast in Beauty and the Beast. And I do understand that maybe if you are living in isolation for a long time, you might forego, some less necessary parts of society. You might decide that it's easier to eat with your hands rather than fashioning a fork. but he still would know what a fork is, you know? It just didn't make sense. It didn't feel very consistent to me. And then the final thing that Andy does that's just completely illogical is that he completely falls for it when Farnham tells him that they can go off together and he can give Andy a better life. Throughout this entire movie, Farnham has done nothing except for physically try to capture and potentially harm Andy, emotionally manipulate him, and then right before this happens that I'm talking about, emotionally manipulate him in front of all of his new peers into transforming. And then immediately after he does that, Andy's like, oh, you know what? Farnham just told me he could give me a better life. I bet that's true. I bet he's not lying. Are you kidding me? It just doesn't make any sense. There's no reason for me to believe that Andy would believe that Farnham is telling the truth. He has had like a bit of a hiccup, I guess you could say, in his life at Monster High because he did just transform and like destroy part of the school, and Headmistress Bloodgood is really not helping make him feel like that's okay. But for the most part, from what we see in the movie, it seems like he's getting on great at Monster High. He's being treated well, he's making new friends, he doesn't understand everything, but no one's shown making fun of him for that. Like, they all seem very accepting. So why would he suddenly go from that, experiencing that, to thinking, oh yeah, it's totally best if I go with this guy who has been manipulating me and trying to hurt me this whole film? Oh God, it's just so stupid and so frustrating. And like, I know that it's there for, again, plot reasons, but I just think it's unbelievably weak in terms of plot reasons. That brings us to Andy's, like, age/maturity/relationships. This is all very difficult because, as I said, we don't have a concrete answer to, like, how old Andy is or what his maturity field looks like. And I do understand that age works kind of differently within the Monster High universe. Like, Draculaura is 1600 years old, but it's stated that vampires age differently than other monsters, so it's, like, not weird for her to be in a relationship with Claude, who I think is 16 at the time, maybe 17, I'm not 100% sure. But, you know, he is presented as being, like, equivalent to Draculaura in age when it comes to how those two different monster types age. It's very complicated. Like, age is a very complicated thing within Monster High. So I do understand that. I understand that I can't just say, oh, Andy's been around for this number of years, so that is like how old he is compared to everyone else, because there's other factors at play in the Monster High universe. So on the surface, Andy and Frankie having like this romantic tension could be feasible. It could be something that's kind of similar to, like I said, Draculaura and Claude, where Andy is definitely older than Frankie, but they might be comparable in terms of where they're at in age based on like the skewed scale of their different monster types. This is very hard to talk about, by the way. Like, the words are very hard to find here. But what I'm getting at is that it could be acceptable, except the way that the movie frames this relationship and Andy's other relationships directly undermines that possibility and in fact makes Andy, to me, seem like a bit of a creep. Andy has a crush on the unnamed scientist that visited Skull Shores, again, long before Frankie and her friends get there. And we do only see like one little scene of them that doesn't even have any dialogue between the two of them. So it is, I guess you could say, if you're trying to be fair, hard to infer what we are supposed to get from that relationship, but we know for sure that Andy had a crush on her because he populates the entire island with statues of this woman, and I think that we're meant to feel like they at least were close. If not in a romantic relationship, the scientist did have some sort of fondness for Andy as well. I feel like that's what we're supposed to get. At the very least, that is what I got, and this is my video with my opinion, so that's what we're going off of. So because of this, and because of the fact that we know that that happened a decent chunk of time ago because of the black and white film that the scientist is filmed with, I feel like that makes Andy having romantic feelings for Frankie also kind of weird. I also think that that makes it so that he shouldn't go to Monster High. Again, I know that monster ages are weird. Draculaura is 1600, Cleo's like a couple thousand years old, Frankie's a few days old or a few weeks old. I get that monster ages are strange, but given the fact that we've seen that Andy years and years ago had a crush on a scientist who maybe was a teenager, maybe was an adult, we don't know. I feel like that says that at this point in his life, at the current day that we see the movie take place in, Andy should be more mature and he should be more towards adulthood than like anything else. Again, I can't say anything with concrete confidence, But that's kind of the vibe that I'm getting, and I just feel like he's way too old to be at Monster High. I can't really give, like, concrete evidence for this, but I just feel like the fling, I don't want to call it a relationship because they don't get in a relationship, but that romantic tension between Andy and Frankie just feels super weird to me because, first of all, he definitely likes her because she looks exactly like this other person that he's been obsessing with for years. Like, again, he populated an entire island with statues of this woman as though he were like a 5th grader, drawing his crush's name in little hearts on every piece of paper he could get his hands on, which shows a level of emotional immaturity, but then also you mix that with his age and it just feels weird. I feel like no matter how you look at it, the relationship between him and Frankie, to me, doesn't seem right, doesn't feel equal or cohesive or good, and I just didn't love that part. So this is the part where we have to talk about the stuff in Skull Shores that, like, actually made me deeply uncomfortable. Everything else that we've been talking about thus far is either a matter of opinion or it's just really not that important in the grand scheme of things. Like a poorly written movie, it's a poorly written movie, you know, whatever. It doesn't actually matter. But I have 2 things about this movie that I felt were actually a problem. And I shouldn't laugh. It's not funny. I'm laughing because I'm uncomfortable. They just affected me in a much deeper sort of way. And so this is the part that I both feel like is most important to talk about, but also makes me the most uncomfortable to talk about. I do want to put a light trigger warning on this section for any Black people who might be watching or anyone watching who is from any sort of Polynesian descent. I don't think that I'm going to be talking about anything in the sort of detail that I would personally find I need a trigger warning for, but I'm not affected by these things, so I feel like it's only fair that I put a warning here in case you are someone who is more affected by these things. I don't want to inadvertently upset you guys, so feel free to skip if you feel like this is just not something you can handle watching. With that out of the way, though, I feel like there's no good way to say this, so we're just gonna blurt it out. At the end of the movie, at the end of Skull Shores, the villain, Farnham, is tarred and feathered. Now, I am fully aware that tarring and feathering is a very old practice that has been used against various different people for various different purposes. And depending on where you live in the world and like what sort of education you got, you might think of something very different when I say tar and feathering than I do. But I can only come at you from my perspective, and as someone who grew up in the United States, still lives here, and was educated here, when I hear tar and feathering, I immediately think of how this was a horrible crime committed against Black civil rights activists, or even just Black people who dared to try to exist. Given that Mattel is a US-based company, and therefore Monster High is a US-based company, I do feel like it is fair to look at this scene through a more Americanized lens. I wouldn't always say that, like I know that America is not the only country in the world or like the most important country in the world, but just given where this company is based, I do think that it's fair to kind of look at it through this lens. And I do know that Farnham has a very light skin tone in this movie, so maybe I am reading too far into things. But I can tell you that seeing a villain tar and feathered in the movie, it was an accident. I guess if you're trying to be fair here, he flew into a flock of birds and then accidentally fell into a pit of tar. So I guess if you want to be fair, it was an accident. But for me, seeing a villain be tar and feathered was really, really jarring. And that's coming from someone who doesn't have to hear that and think about the fact that my people were subjected to this violent, horrible thing just because of the color of their skin, you know? Like, that's coming from someone who is not as deeply affected, and I found it terrible. So I can only imagine how hard this scene would be to watch for Black Americans. I don't know personally, obviously, but I feel like it must be very painful to some people. Even if you do take race out of it, I still think it was a really weird decision. Like, there's no reason that this is how the movie needed to end. And also the way that it's framed was very off-putting. The movie literally ends with a bunch of high school students laughing as a man is tar and feathered. And that's just creepy to me. Like, that's so messed up. Again, even taking race out of it, that's kind of messed up. And he could have just as easily just ran away of his own volition or been reformed or, you know, like, meant to endure some punishment, like jail time. You know, this didn't have to be the ending, and the fact that it is framed in a positive light and even a comedic light is really concerning to me. I feel like if you make an adult movie that features a scene where someone is tarred and feathered and it's meant to be done to force viewers to really understand how horrific this act was. I don't think it's something that I could personally watch, but I would understand it a little bit more. You know, if it were something, again, very important to mention here, this was a kids movie. So if this were something that I saw in a film that is explicitly aimed at adults and it is framed in a very negative light, I could understand that more. But to have it happen in a kids movie and be framed as a good thing made me violently uncomfortable. So, off of that highly charged bit, the second thing is a lot less violent, but still very morally questionable to me, and that is the way that the movie, first of all, had tiki people as characters, and then also the way that they are portrayed. I mention this very frequently whenever race happens to come up in my videos, but I am just a white person, so it's not like I have any personal stake or personal experience in this, so I would be very, very happy to hear from anyone of Polynesian descent in the comments down below if you have, you know, opinions that actually come from a place of experience about this issue, just because I'm definitely not the forefront authority on it. But from what I've read, different people from different Polynesian cultures are kind of divided on the like Americanized tiki thing. Some people don't really mind it because it's so far removed from the actuality of their culture that it doesn't affect them, and some people find the fact that there's like tiki bars and hula parties kind of offensive because it ignores the fact that these things are based off of misunderstandings of actual cultures. So it's not a cut and dry issue from what I understand, and again, I can't speak to it personally, but from what I've read, some Polynesian people really don't like the existence of like tiki stuff. I don't want to have to put quotes in every single time I say that, but I feel like I shouldn't use that term super lightly either, you know? But yeah, with that said, the existence of the tiki people in Skull Shores is again a bit more morally gray than the tarring and feathering, just because I know that there are definitely some Polynesian people out there who won't care, and there are probably Polynesian people out there who will think that it's really, really wrong. So it's a little bit more in between, but to me the worst part is the way that they're portrayed, and that is definitely a bigger problem to me than their existence in general. The like Americanized tiki theme is not based on any one Polynesian culture, and it's not always very accurate. It's kind of an amalgamation at best and a bastardization at worst of various different real cultures, and it's just used as like a fun little party theme, which in and itself is, you know, a little bit questionable. But in this movie, the tiki people definitely go beyond that like stereotypical theme. For one thing, they don't really have any individual characters. They almost seem to act more as like a hive mind rather than like each individual tiki person having their own thoughts and feelings. They also aren't portrayed as having very much independence. They follow Farnham without explanation. Like, the viewer never gets to know why they just follow Farnham, and they do so without question from the moment that he lands on Skull Shores. We know he's been here before, but like they just go with it, right? And then as soon as Abby kind of presents them an alternative, they decide to turn on Farnham and kind of side with the ghouls instead, which is somewhat framed as being their own decision, but to me it really does appear as though they're just willing to blindly follow whoever has the most persuasive argument at any point in time. You know, it's not really, to me, portrayed as these people having their own thoughts on issues or making their own decisions. It's kind of just like, oh, this person told me what to do. Oh, this person told me what to do. Let's change sides. You know, like, it's weird. My camera just died and I have no idea where it cut off, and this is so important. Like, I can't, this is the worst possible section for this to happen. So if the editing here is a little bit weird, I'm sorry. I'm gonna, like, try to piece this together as best as I can, because the way that my camera works, it will like cut off, but by the time it tells me it cut off, it's not been recording for like 30 seconds to a minute. So I'm sorry. I'm gonna try to stitch this together as good as I can, but I feel like this is a really important section and I'm talking about really serious stuff, so I'm just gonna like re-record part of it and then try to stitch it together, and I'm sorry if it seems a little bit weird. I'm not trying to like take this lightly. I'm just trying to get it across with my camera not functioning super well. In addition, the Tiki people do understand English, or rather, they understand whatever language you're listening to the movie in. I'm just saying English because that's the version that I watched. Both Abby and Farnham talk to them in English and they understand perfectly what is going on, but they don't speak English back. Now, that in and of itself isn't really a problem because, for example, I would not go to Hawaii and be offended when Native Hawaiians don't speak English because that would be super weird. They're absolutely entitled to use their own language on their own land, you know? But I do think that the way the movie does this serves to kind of distance the Tiki people from our perception of, for lack of a better word, humanity. I don't know what the right answer would be here because there's, to me, no easy and good solution. Again, Tiki is a theme based off of many different distinct cultures, so it's not like they all share one language that you could use and have the Tiki people speak and then put subtitles in for the audience to understand. And I also don't think that it would be super great to come up with your own language that the Tiki people are speaking, because I feel like that is a very easy way to also do the wrong thing by these various Polynesian cultures that are being ripped off of. So I don't know what the answer is, but I guess what I'm getting at is by having the audience not be able to understand either verbally or with subtitles what the Tiki people are saying, it distances them from us, and to me it makes it seem like the movie is trying to frame them as almost second-class citizens, especially when you put it in conjunction with the other two things I talked about with regards to the Tiki people. Really quick, I wanted to clarify, I kind of said this in the wrong order. Obviously, not speaking the same language as someone else does not make you a second-class citizen. I really meant that when you combine it with the other ways the Tiki people are framed, it all adds up to being really bad. Like, if they were framed as very individual characters who had distinct actions and who were shown to be taking action of their own volition, if we couldn't understand them, I don't think that that would be a problem because, like, yeah, I don't understand every language, and that doesn't automatically mean that people who don't speak English are bad, obviously. But I just think when you lump it all together, it doesn't look great. And I'll explain that more in a little bit. I just feel like in that section, I kind of didn't word it great, so I wanted to clarify really quick. So when we can't understand them, and when they seem to have like a hive mind, and when they are perfectly happy, it seems, to just follow blindly whoever is there to give them orders, it feels really weird to me. It seems very inappropriate and very strange, and it, again, I know they're not technically humans because this is a Monster High movie, but it seems to be an attempt to remove their humanity, and like they're just lackeys for whoever happens to come by. And I do think that villains and movies can have lackeys in a good way. Like if you were to have an army of robots that just mindlessly follow your commands and you're a villain of a movie, I think that that makes sense and is a little bit less morally like a problem, unless they are AI, because like if they are robots that are capable of having emotions, that gets weird again. But if they're basically just a bunch of computers that you have that follow your orders, I think that's a good way to have like a bunch of lackeys without it being super weird. But that's not what this movie did, obviously. Instead, Skull Shores created, for lack of a better word, a race of people in their movie that is based off of a disservice to various different cultures and an amalgamation of various different cultures, and then they're portrayed as basically being lesser than or subservient to the other characters in this movie, and I just feel like that's a weird thing to do. So, that is finally everything I have to say about Skull Shores. This one was definitely a doozy, because not only were there so many things that I just feel like were poorly executed on a very superficial level, but like we just talked about, I feel like there's some stuff in this movie that's kind of harmful and not good. And so this was a hard one to write, a hard one to get through, and it left a really bad taste in my mouth, if I'm being honest. I still do intend to watch the rest of the Gen 1 Monster High movies, and I'm holding out just a smidgen of hope that they will be a little bit better. but this one kind of knocked my enthusiasm down a notch for sure. The next movie that I'm going to be taking a look at is Friday Night Frights, and I'm violently hoping that that one's better. Because again, even though I am committed to following this through and committed to watching all the movies, I just want to be able to feel happy while watching one at this point. I just don't want another Skull Shores on my hand. I would be very curious to see what you guys think, especially because I'm sure a lot of y'all saw this movie when you were kids, and I feel like if I had seen this movie as a child, I wouldn't have picked up on the worst parts of it. Like, I might have thought that it wasn't super entertaining or necessarily like the best written of all the movies that I saw as a kid, but I do think that the worst parts might have gone over my head, so I am kind of interested to see what your thoughts are on it now, having kind of revisited the material. But yeah, that's it for today. Despite the heavy nature of what we talked about, I do hope you were able to get something out of this video. I don't really know if enjoy is a good word, but I do hope you were able to get something out of it. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day or your night or whatever it might be, and I will catch you in the next more upbeat video. Bye, guys.